Jarren, hello. How are you?
Hello, Ken. I'm well. How are you today?
Really, really good. To be honest, I'm very excited to talk to you about this because, well, perfectionism specifically, but to you specifically because, I really enjoy chatting with you and it's just so easy to talk with you about all things in our community.
Great. And likewise, it's lovely to be here. And I always love spending time with you, Ken. And we always have great chats. So it's nice that other people can kind of see what we get up to in our chats, our big chats.
I completely agree. So on that note, would you like to share with everyone a bit about who you are,
Mhm.
what you do, and how you got into the field that you're doing right now?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Jarren, obviously, and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, so I'm in Canada, and I'm a leadership and life coach. So I help people in their businesses and in their life. I don't really believe that there's a separation of both, and they tend to have strings between both of them. And so I help in both areas of life and business. And specifically, the area of perfectionism is something that is really near and dear to my heart. Not only do I see it in the world, I see it with my clients, I see it with friends. I deal with it as well. I work through it every day. And so, I've learned a thing or two in the 45 years that I've been on this earth. And specifically even the last 5 years, just really diving into this and really seeing how pervasive it is, especially in the gay community. I see this over and over and over again. So part of my excitement is how can we liberate ourselves from this perfectionism that is around us and pervasive through compassion and kindness, not being hard on each other. But how can we have a little compassion to ourselves as we move through this big thing called perfectionism?
Yeah, I love that, Jarren. I love that. And before I reply back to that, just for your audience, so my name is Ken. I'm a relationship coach for single gay men, helping them to overcome heartbreak, rejection, identify red flags, and help them attract open, honest, committed partners. Which is damn hard when perfectionism is involved. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I love the fact that you identify in your role that working on ourselves also has a big impact on our jobs. And I actually think too, it has a huge impact on our relationships. And I think that you're right. With perfectionism, it's almost like a very masochistic kind of treatment of ourselves because we keep putting ourselves on this pedestal to perform better and better and better and get it right and tweak and tinker until magically, everything will be fine. Ironically enough, it never will be. I know for me and my fitness journey, and I've talked about this a few times, that I got to the stage where I just couldn't appreciate any of the progress that I'd made. It just constantly, the narrative was running in my head was not enough.
Yeah.
Which in and of itself is obviously rooted in the usual I'm not enough story. But I think that for a lot of people, particularly in our community, gay men really do struggle with perfectionism. And I think that it's been something that's really hurt their own sense of who they are, what they're after in a relationship. I've had clients who come to me sometimes with a laundry list of things that they expect and want out of a partner. And I often have to, I don't want to say disappoint them, but often have to say, you may have to reevaluate your expectations of what you're actually looking for. But I'd love to hear from you, Jarren. How would you describe perfectionism, and what would you say are some of the typical actions of a perfectionist?
Yeah, so if I can make it super simple, and I know this is not super simple. There are many layers and factors that bring about perfectionism.
Yeah.
We're not just one thing. We're a combination of our experiences and our temperaments and our emotions and our upbringing. So to distill it down really easily, I would say that perfectionism is unrealistic expectations of yourself and others. It just makes it really simple. When dealing with perfectionism, expectations are what we delve in almost solely. The expectations that you have of yourself and the expectations that you feel others have of you as well. And how this shows up in relationships is very interesting because it's not one or the other. Often it's both. at the same time, which can leave us feeling absolutely terrified, stuck, angry, defensive, you name it. So it's really, really challenging for us to sort of define it, as I said before, as one thing, because so many factors come into it. I mean, if we just start with how we grew up, that is a huge part of that. You know, the only thing that I can sort of equate this to, and I share my own story around this because that's mostly what I have, is, you know, for me growing up, I was obviously gay. I knew that from a young age on one level or not. I had a sister who was cognitively disabled, so she required a lot of care. And so early on, I realized people would say, oh, Jarren, what a good kid. He's a good boy, isn't he? And she was having tantrums. She was in the hospital. Like, it was just insanity for her. So I quickly equated that being a good boy made me look perfect. And plus, I was gay. So therefore, I could hide in plain sight if I were this good boy. And so thus began my own, you know, being a good boy and not showing anything that's happening and always striving for this perfection. Always, in every situation, in relationships, in dating, looking for this ideal partner that never materialized.
Yeah. I love that you brought up that whole point about being a good boy equated to love, essentially. Like, you know, it made you feel good. And yeah, oh man, I know what you mean when you say that too. I think that you're right. Like, even growing up for me too, I know that it was always academic achievement for my mum. Like, if I never did well in school, it was always a problem for her. Like, and even when I did well, it was always great. But what are your other students doing? What are they working on right now? You should be thinking about what the next thing is. And so from a very young age, I became conditioned into that thought pattern of what's next? Not what have I achieved, what's the next thing to do? And even recently, I remember when I finished my Masters of Marketing and I'd done exceptionally well. Like, I think I topped that entire class. And the reason why I'm shaking on that is because I know I came in the top 3, but they never disclosed that. It's not the point. The point is that, you know, I think that it's one of those things where at that time, I remember celebrating that to be told, you need to go and do your MBA. And I was just like, what? Like, can't I even just celebrate and enjoy what I've created? No, you need to do your MBA.
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of thought pattern, that kind of belief that, you know, we can't rest on our laurels and look back and go, man, I've achieved a lot of good things and I have the right to be proud of myself.
Yeah.
Really keeps us stuck.
Big
and
time.
I think it also hurts too, as, you know, I think growing up gay, I think hurts in many ways too, because if we've had a difficult time in childhood, then you're sort of benchmarking yourself against like what an alpha male would look like, which is straight, fit, you know, gets all the ladies, so to speak. So you translate that to, you know, our community. And of course, even if no one's ever actually expressed that, if no one, like, even if no one's ever really said, this is what the ideal guy is, I mean, it's plastered in our minds. And so we equate, you know, having an immaculate body, we have to have like all the shiny objects around us, metaphorically speaking, for like wealth, status, friends, and it's very excessive. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up the comparing sort of aspect, because this is a huge part of perfectionism. And I think you talked about your family comparing you against other people. And generally, this is where this starts is, you know, you're not like so-and-so, or you should be more like so-and-so. So they're not actually, I think for us, being a young person, we don't equate that love is just freely given, that there's conditions. So we're shown that like we have to constantly compare ourselves to others for validation of who we are. So already, right off the bat, our sense of identity is sort of screwed, if I can use it a plain, you know, a really simple term, is that we don't have a chance. Secondly, I love what you're talking about. I believe it was in The Velvet Rage. He talks about the the fact that our filter of how we see ourselves is already through a filter. And I think he talks about it as sort of like we are the homosexual, and he uses that term intentionally, that the way we view ourselves is not as who we are, but how, for lack of a better word, the straight world sees us. And so we
Yes.
actually take on this identity that that's who we are. And there's a huge load of self-loathing and shame that comes with that, which makes it very difficult for us to form an identity apart from the comparisons. And so obviously we're not starting off, great in our life if, like in my case, my parents were overwhelmed. They didn't know that I was going through this. They didn't compare, but I quickly caught on, because both my parents are perfectionists, that it's not enough just to achieve something and enjoy that. It was like, once you achieve it, what's next? Like I battle this to this day, and I catch myself often is when I finish a big project, I'm like, whew, that feels good. What's next? Like I don't even stop for 2 seconds. And when I was in my learnings, I remember this came up around celebrating, wins or times. And I was like, yeah, I celebrate all the time, right? Like, I say a cheers or I go for a drink. But I wasn't really. I was just kind of going from one thing to the next. So I wasn't actually enjoying what I did and reflecting back, how well I did, what I learned through that, what my strengths were through that. I didn't do that. I was just like on to the next thing. Because in order to do that, that would mean I'd have to look inside myself and confront the fact that I was uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable with who I was. So it's easier just to keep going. Because if you just keep going, you don't have to look back. But the minute I look back was sort of a reckoning, honestly, when I started putting that practice into place.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's one of those things where you can't outrun that. I mean,
No.
that's something that we teach in therapy, which is that, you either deal with it now or it will deal with you later. Because it's one of those horrific things where I think when we're built on very shaky ideas and we push all of our sense of validation on how we compare ourselves to everyone else. Oh, what a terrible way to feel. Like, I mean, I know as an entrepreneur too, there was a time when I used to compare myself to so-and-so's journey and be like, oh, I want to be like that person. I have to have X, Y, Z done like this person.
Yeah.
And then I also noticed that it really did my head in. It. Like, I was just like, this is really unhealthy. I need to actually be very mindful of who I'm comparing and being inspired by, because it's really very anxious inducing, because you just have this constant feeling like, what's next? What's next? What's next? How do I get to be like this person? How do I do this? It's just like, no, stop for a second. What do you want?
Yeah.
But then of course, when you do that question, then you run into the usual nest of, oh, well, that's selfish. That's egotistical. I can't possibly do that. And then of course, how you would then unpack that. And I mean, without obviously going down into that, into that rabbit hole, so to speak,
Yeah.
I think one thing that I loved about what you said is that we definitely are filtered through, as Alan Downs talks about in The Velvet Rage, this idea of being gay, and that kind of dominates our identity, because we think, oh, well, we have to live up to this standard. If we live up to this idea, whatever idea that might actually be, because I think there's many ideas of what being gay is for a lot of our community.
Oh, definitely.
Because you've got like the twinks, the bears, the very fit athletic guys, and also the very effeminate guys too. And I think there's like a cross-pollination of all of them too. And I want to step back and say, I'm not in any way judging those identities. I am saying that there is definitely an element of a standard that seems to be, the ideal for each of these different groups.
Yeah.
And it causes us to sort of feel like we have to match that energy, that standard. And I just think that at times it's actually the death of us in many ways, because we're not actually connecting with ourselves.
No, I agree completely. And this is so challenging in our community, as you sort of, I think what I find challenging, what I see is that sort of we've grown up with these sort of things we've put in place around, say, perfectionism, but yet we are doing that to our brothers. We continue to perpetuate that to each other.
Mm.
And that worries me, honestly, as a gay man, never mind as a coach or anything else,
Mm.
that we are not only allowed, like it takes so much. I kind of compare it to like it takes a lot for us to get to a place of self-acceptance for many, many gay men. And
Oh yeah.
then we're in it. And then I've heard actually gay men say this when they become more self-aware. They're like, it's almost like coming out again within the community. And
Oh
there's
yeah.
actually, there can be a shunning. I've talked to people who like, people are like, what are you talking about? Like self-help, like you want to be better, you want to feel better with your life. Like, come on, let's go drinking, let's go night clubbing. Like, and the person is like,
Mm.
that's fine. I enjoy doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But they have like, I have this other side. So it's like a second coming out within the community for many men. And that is challenging. And that's who I talk to, as people who are like, I don't know who to talk to. My friends won't talk to me about this. I tried, on dates, I'll try talking about it. Like, never mind. Like, what are you talking about? This stuff is woo woo. Like, what is this stuff?
Yeah. Oh, I hear you on that completely. I hear you on that so much. I think that you're absolutely right. I know in spiritual texts they refer to that second coming out as you call it more as like an awakening because you're coming back to yourself and really just figuring out, okay, like, it's really, it's a bit of a grieving process because you're sort of grieving the loss of that previous identity that you had
Yeah.
and also the life you thought you had too. You were like, I thought I was connected to these guys, but in reality, I never was. I
No,
never actually had a connection. It was just a matter of, constantly trying to compete with everyone else to be seen and heard, which is
that's
not
right.
actually genuine or authentic too.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard because tying this into the topic of this video too, with like relationships. I mean, let's start with friends. I think that
Mm,
what you're pointing out here is really valid. It's sort of like there are these tick boxes that our community has to have. Most notably, going out, drinking, drugs, whatever it may be.
mhm.
I just think that, it creates a perception that this is who you have to be. And if you're not doing this, there's something critically wrong with you, which is kind of like a school mentality. It's kind of like,
Mhm.
well, if you're not with the cool guys,
Yeah.
get out.
Yeah.
And it's really hard because I think for a lot of these guys, and I have clients who are like this too, they'll say to me, I don't really feel like I fit in with the broader group. And ironically enough, I think a lot of people feel that way.
A lot.
I think even those that are actually physically in these groups will often say, I don't feel like I actually belong to these people at
Yeah.
all. And it's just like, well, funnily enough, you don't.
Yeah.
Because I think real, genuine connection, it's hard work, being vulnerable and actually being okay and this is the hard part, I think, for a lot of us, being okay to actually accept the fact that the people that are around you may not respect you
Yeah.
because they are not ready to actually be vulnerable themselves
That's
and their
right.
own shame is coming out. And so, they don't want to look at that because I think this is something that I think ties us all in is that there is a lot of impression management. I think so many gay men would like to show on the surface, my life is hunky-dory. Look at me, I'm with all the, the glamorous cool parties. Everything else is going great.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, oh man, I think the
Yeah.
comparison syndrome hits real hard there because then you're on social media. I know I've done this. You're on social media. You're looking at the other gay guys thinking, oh, damn, I need to be more like them. And it
That's
just becomes
right.
so soul crushing.
Yeah, that's right. That is soul crushing. So even what you said there, you can sort of see the funnel that leads you to feeling lonely, and loneliness is really
Mm.
high in the gay community. I
Oh,
would
yeah.
say. I mean, it's very high right now with COVID, of course, but talking to other gay men during COVID who already feel lonely, and on top of this, feel even more lonely. It's really isolating how we can be set up in life. And it was interesting you were talking about like what I want in life, the wants.
Mm.
For me, again, I'll keep bringing it back to my own story, is that like I found that very confronting when people would say like, what do you want? Because I was so used to living through other people's perception of me that it's like I would
Mm.
go, well, no, like what do you want, and what do you want, and you want, and then I formulate what I want from based on what they want. Um,
Yes.
so it's really hard, and you throw a good healthy dose of shame in there, And then you go to deep, dark parts of yourself, that you don't want to show the light of day to. And that's really hard. Many of us, myself included, I was very good about just being like, shame? Oh yeah, no, I'm not experiencing shame. I will just push it down and push it down and push it down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and as we know, that's so detrimental. And like a couple of stats is, like perfectionism. What is it in Canada? It's something like 1 in 5 people who identify as perfectionists deal with anxiety. And there's also
Yeah.
research that perfectionism actually is a cause of IBS, so gastrointestinal problems.
Mm.
So this like
Gosh, I'm
has
glad you brought that up.
this has such a huge physical impact on us. So if we're talking about dating, and what about a sex life? What are the implications of sexual performance, especially as you're dating and having to be the standard of being like an Adonis, rock hard for hours, go, 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 and with as many people
Yeah.
as possible, like it's just not real. Um,
Yeah. Oh
yeah.
gosh, Jarren, you touched on so many good points.
Sorry, I threw a few zingers in there for you.
I mean, part of me is super excited because on one hand, I want to separate this into two things because I thought that was really good. I loved every minute of that. Let me just start with one thing that you said, which I thought was brilliant, which was this whole point about, the standards we put on ourselves and others as gay men, to be like a rock hard Adonis in the bed, hit the sheets, sex is perfect. As a relationship coach, I get frustrated with the guys who come to me sometimes being like, I want, the best sex ever. And I'm like, that's lovely, but do you want a relationship? The two are, I mean, they're obviously not mutually exclusive. However, one does not define the other in in that degree. Like, it is important
Yeah.
to enjoy the rewards of a healthy relationship, which obviously sex can fulfill. And I think that's the difference between friendship and a romantic relationship, which is why that's there in the first place.
That's right.
But I think because our community is so sex preoccupied, and also, topping and bottoming, I've heard people say to me things like, oh, we're so advanced compared to the heterosexual community. Look at us doing all these things. And I'm like, not wrong. I agree. We are exploring. The thing that I think that is problematic is when it becomes the labeling, and it's sort of like, you have to be a bottom, you have to be a top. And it's sort of like this union of sex positions. And it's just sort of like, I don't know about you, Jarren, but without going into too much graphic detail, but in my time, I've never really bothered too much with that sort of thing when I'm dating guys, in the sense that I'm sort of just like, it kind of just fits and you work it out and you communicate it out with the guy that you're with. So
yeah.
I think that's one thing that I've experienced. But the other thing too that I'd add to that, which can be sometimes ridiculous, is that, I've had clients where they look incredible, and they then project the sort of standard that they need, that they want someone to be very physical with them back. And I'm like, are you asking a bit much? Do you need to have someone who's already baked and ready to go with you right away? Or can you actually negotiate that? Healthy relationships can actually thrive off that negotiation and say, listen, for me, this physical component of my life is huge. I actually really require my partner to be working on this part too, because it actually improves my enjoyment, my satisfaction.
Yes.
And I don't want you to do that for yourself. It's more just to say that for the relationship, this is important.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's that one thing that I wanted to talk about. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up, which I thought was big, was the IBS point that you made too. So I don't know about you, Jarren. I'm a long-standing sufferer of IBS, and welcome to the fam. A lot of my clients, I think, are too, and I don't think that we as anyone in general really talks about this nearly enough. They probably just think, oh, this is normal, right, to have like gut issues. And I'm like, no, we didn't evolve this long to have gut issues.
No.
But what's really interesting is the way in which the mind and the gut connect, and how that does, as you said, cause anxiety. I know for me, I have suffered from mild forms of anxiety my life. I have definitely overcome a lot of the mental part of it too. But I can see what you're saying about the perfectionism part, because that when you are comparing yourself to other people, to goals, to things that are just, quite honestly, sometimes a bit outlandish, it just increases your cortisol and serotonin levels. It makes you despair, and that can really cause you to freak out thinking, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, oh, how will I, how will I be able to achieve this?
Yeah.
So is it any wonder that that would also increase blood sugar levels? It also increases your craving for like carbs and sugars,
Yeah.
and you have like, all kinds of infections like yeast infections and such, which form as a result of that imbalance that happens too.
Yeah.
So I loved everything that you said. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I think that we underestimate the power of our mind and our gut in how that impacts our health.
Big time, big time. And this is so interesting to me because I do this work and I do the inner work that has taught me there. My IBS, my gastro stuff has brought me to a place where I no longer deal with that anymore. And I've done that through a meditative practice. And honestly, it's self-compassion. And that sounds so airy, but it really is. There's something about self-compassion. A few years ago, I was kind of dealing with anxiety big time. I had an attack because I was just going, go, 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 go. And things were happening in my life. And I ended up having this attack. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. My gut was an all-time terrible. Like I was just not happy. And I think when I started to have a meditative practice where self-compassion was a huge part of that. And how I came to that was I started meditating. And, meditating is very popular right now, right? We all know people who meditate. There's lots of apps. Many of us do it. We know the benefits.
I'm a daily meditator.
Yeah. And so I had been studying in a particular type of meditation, and I decided that I would go week to week, and it was always different every week, a different meditation, and I'd try it during the week. And then we had a summer break, and I was like, I'm just going to try to meditate on self-compassion for a 2-month period, every day, twice a day, and just see how that goes. Something in me was just being like, I don't know, let's try this. And so I started to do that, and my relationship with myself changed drastically. And I'm not being overly kind of exuberant here. It really changed my relationship with myself, and therefore changed my relationships around me. And it was so profound. I started healing my body, and I started healing relationships that had not been good. Mostly a father relationship, which I know, if you want to clear a party full of gay men, just bring up dad stuff. It's only, there's so much kind of male stuff that for me wasn't there growing up.
Same here.
So that was a huge part. And so I had to heal that, but I was able to start to heal my relationship with my father, at least how I thought it was. So there was this like knock-on effect of a physiological thing, and then a relational thing, and then never mind a mind thing. Because when we're focusing on certain things, our emotions run through our body. It's not like it all just happens up here. We know that we have reactions. So like it actually runs through our cells and our bloodlines. When we're angry, we don't just feel it up here. We feel it everywhere. When we're rageful, like our body gets angry. When we're sad, we cry and we curl up. We feel these in our bodies. So we have a chance to change that. And it's not overnight. It takes practice. And, self-compassion is a great practice for any perfectionist. And it's one of the hardest things to do, for sure.
I completely agree with everything you said. I think to add to that too, Jarren, it gets worse before it gets better, because you're going to go into some deep stuff. I know, listening to what you describe with your meditation and your inner work practices, it's the same for me as well. And I mean, I have a lot of faith and respect for the self-development work and really healing our relationship with ourselves. And in fact, it's what I get my clients to do. And I think that the value of it is that we can't have genuine, authentic relationships if we're not actually addressing the relationship we have with ourselves. And that includes our repressed emotions,
Yes.
I know that for a lot of people who are listening and who may not have experience with this, but I know that for people who, myself included, have had repressed emotions where you store that resentment and anger and frustration. Oh boy, that just manifests itself as more, physical autoimmune challenges, IBS, the bloating and all that sort of stuff. And I'd love to know, Jarren, if you were to compare yourself to who you were versus who you are today, perfectionist Jarren versus more calm, tempered Jarren, can you give people an understanding of like the differences in your behavior then and now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, completely.
Mm.
I look back and I'm like, how did I do that for so long? What I see now, I didn't see at the time, was that I was like a leaf blowing in the wind and my emotions went with it. I went from crisis to relationship that were not serving me. And I was just
Mm.
constantly in a state of like choosing maybe wrong relationships. I say that with
Mm.
tons of self-love, relationships that were not edifying for me. And I knew it on some level, but my need for connection was so strong that I was willing to forget about my emotional safety and health because it was more important to have someone than to have no one. Because my biggest fear, and we were talking about fear before, fear of being alone was the scariest thing I could ever think about. What that said to me as a person, as a gay man, not being wanted, my sexual currency came into it, and I use that word as sexual currency because I think we use this in our community.
I
We
100%
use sex
agree.
as a trading tool for what we want. Um, so yeah, so I would say like I was floating in the wind, going from crisis to crisis to crisis, and it would just be like relationship or this or I can't do that and it just was constant. Now, thank God I had some people in my life who were there for me through that. But
Mm.
I thank them to this day. I'm like, oh gosh, you were so patient with me as I went through these relationships and for me, I would get into relationships for a long period of time. So it wasn't like I would date. I would go through periods of like dating several people, and then I would jump into these relationships that weren't serving me for years sometimes. And then I come out of them
Mm.
being like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like I gave everything to this relationship. So I was like, it was very much all or nothing for me. Um, Whereas now I'm able to sort of see that there are many layers of who I am, and I have a choice on how I show up in those relationships, and I have a choice of what my boundaries are in those relationships. Boundaries
Mm.
are huge, at least they were for me. And the only way I can describe my old boundaries was like, I'd say, like, Ken, this is my boundary, Ken. And you'd be like, oh, okay, well, like, maybe with that. So I'd be like, okay, here's my boundary. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, well, we'll accommodate a little bit. Oh, yeah, okay, well, Ken, like, since you're saying such a nice thing, I'll accommodate this even more. And then suddenly my boundaries were gone. I had none. And so then I'm wondering why I'm left there being like, who am I? What is this relationship? I don't know who I am anymore.
Yeah.
Um, because I had nothing in place. And then I would beat myself up over it. So this is the killer is that I'd kind of go through this hardship and then I'd be like, how were you so stupid? You should have seen this before. I mean, my God, you know? So it was this
Yeah.
lovely, perfect cycle that I went through and through and through.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear
Yeah.
you completely, Jaron. And I think it's so hard because, as we talked about, it's so easy to get trained into that sort of mindset too. We
Yeah.
don't appreciate how much our childhood impacts us too.
Oh, yeah.
Something that you've gone through, I've gone through, I know from actually what we've talked about too prior to this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
being very type A, being very much like, I need to be a high achiever. I need to get all my ducks lined up in a row. I need to have X, Y, and Z before I do this.
Yeah.
That kind of mentality, I get it. I understand why we have had that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I also recognize how crippling it can be in the realm of relationships too, because you're right, boundaries are just blurred. It's sort of just like, oh, let's just kind of accommodate for this, behavior, this person, because they make me feel good. And I think it's because the absence of, because perfectionism really does rely on, not feeling good, because it's sort of like, I will strive and do all this work, and then I will get the reward for all my hard work sort of
That's
thing.
right.
And I think it also leads into really abusive territories sometimes too, not specifically you as an
Yeah.
abuser, but more in terms of like, it can lead us into relationships and even situationships where we just kind of, are finding ourselves at the mercy of people who are, maybe amazing when they show up, but there's like such an imbalance. We're putting in so much work and effort. We're just trying to drive this, believing that, they say and they do all the right things,
Yeah.
but really they don't. And, you know,
No.
it's plain as day, especially as a coach, because I see it and I see, like, you know,
Yeah.
these dysfunctional dynamics where one person's not texting nearly as much, one person clearly is just not investing nearly as much, and the other person who is a perfectionist is just at their wit's end, but still has this belief that one day there'll be a payoff.
Right.
One day there'll be something that actually comes as a result of all of this too.
Yeah.
And I have to be the bearer of bad news sometimes and go, unless you are willing to actually step into your fear and ask for what you want and need, you may have to accept the reality that right now, not the future, right now is actually your future.
Yeah.
Right? This is it.
Yeah.
What you're working on right now is not working.
Mm-hmm.
You need to change your approach, because this idea of pouring in more effort will not give you a sustainable, healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And I think, I know I say this also from my own experience too, like when I was dating, even last year, I'd make excuses up for myself being like, oh, they said they appreciate me. You know, we've done all this time together and all this sort of stuff. And then, you know, I have to call myself out and be like, well, hang on a minute. You know, why have I put in so much work for so little reward? And how am I feeling right now? Because that answer is frustrated. I don't want to feel frustrated, to be completely honest.
No.
I want to feel invigorated. I want to feel, you know, a sense of mutual growth.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't what I want to feel. So I think perfectionism and our community go hand in hand, because when we're constantly being told, well, we're not enough, we constantly strive to fit in, be enough, to show up. And I just think that for so many of us in our relationships, particularly in dating, you know, we really do shoot ourselves in the foot. And I'll tell you one way, which I've noticed a lot of my clients do this too, is this idea that it's a thought. I need to impress my partner to be with them. Has that been something that you've experienced or seen with any of your clients as well?
Yeah. I mean, it's different I think when you meet somebody, you want to put your best foot forward. But at the same time, it's almost like you've got to create an illusion of who you think you are so they'll accept you, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
As opposed to, and something in perfectionism is the rejection of what actually is. Because we have this constant like perfect ideal of where we should be. And so it's not actually looking at when we're in front of a situation, like kind of, you know, what's the saying is like, what are the facts, Jack? He's not calling you back. He doesn't emotionally take care of you, blah, blah, blah. You know, the list can go on and on. But maybe one day he'll change. You know, I lived in hope through many relationships, you know, this gorgeous person, this amazing artist, you know, and I'm like, wow, this guy's so cool. Like, what would it like to have a life with him? But yet there were things blatantly staring me in the face, and I was still refusing to see it. Because my need to be wanted or to be told I'm worth something, the striving for it was so more important than actually finding it, if that makes sense.
It does. It really does. Because I think, you know, when we are in a state of perfection, we just constantly think, well, I'm not enough. Therefore, you're just constantly like, I need to have somebody to make me feel validated from all my work. And it's like,
exactly.
They're not going to do that for you because they don't respect you. And you also don't respect yourself. You know,
That's right.
I think it's the harsh thing that even when we're achieving all these things, our self-worth is at an all-time low, because we're constantly almost pulling the chain, our own chain, so to speak, thinking that, you know, oh, well, I'll just pull all this effort and make it work. And as you said, oh my gosh, when you were describing that whole thing of, you know, maybe they will change. Oh, Jesus. How many times have we heard that phrase being uttered in dating and relationships too?
Yeah.
I just think that the whole, you know, this whole approach to dating, I think, has also been heavily influenced by what we consume media-wise. You know, I think that we look at like so many shows where, you know, you'll see these people change. And quite honestly, I think it's deeply unrealistic, because let me ask you this question, you know, Jarren, how long did it take you to change from the man you were to the man you are today?
Yeah, like years. Like it was, it was completely, it's been a journey, for lack of a better word. Like it's so, it doesn't happen overnight. It's
No.
incrementally change happens bit by bit, right? Um, and I think back to unrealistic expectations, especially when we identify like, okay, maybe I need to be a better listener or whatever that is, or, that we expect that we're going to do it like right away. And when we don't, that's when the sort of like the self-abuse happens, is like, well, why did I even try anyways? I'm not worth it. Like I couldn't,
Yes.
I can't do that. So, so it's always, like, and again, I just want to clarify that striving, and there's an author named Tal Ben Shahar, and he writes about optimalism as opposed to perfectionism. So being your optimal self, and the difference is, and really simply is, perfectionists will beat themselves up and have unrealistic expectations of themselves and others, whereas an optimist will be like, this is what this is. And maybe that's, you're trying dating, a different way of dating. And you have to kind of say like, you know what? I may go on a few dates that are duds, but I might learn something about myself or what I want. And this is something that I went through many years ago when I was on this journey of like self-exploration, was that I realized I was dating the same sorts of guys.
Oh my God, yes, same as me.
Yeah. And it's like they were emotionally unavailable, they were narcissistic, and the egos on them were crazy. But they were quite successful. So I thought they had it all together.
Right? And it's so easy to think that, and it's so easy to be inspired by that because that's the image that we're going for. So we think, oh, well, more of the same, please. And then you realize to yourself later down the road, that's really unhealthy. I
That's
relate so
right.
hard to what you've just said. I mean,
Yeah.
I know the other day I actually made a story out of this where I just said my type, as I only realized the other day, was still lingering back in my mind, is a guy that was 6 foot, had the capacity to speak more than one language, well off,
Mm,
looked like they were
yeah.
getting on really well with their career,
Yeah.
and was an image of success.
Yeah.
I dated, I kid you not, 6 of these guys,
Yeah.
and they were all the same as the first.
Yeah.
And I think subconsciously, I was just like, oh, I really wanted to work. I really want, like, even though if I never said it, I think subconsciously at the back of my mind, there was just something inside of me which was like, if only I could get one of them that would actually make it work. And of course, it didn't.
No.
And I think that's why now, with the power of hindsight and also the power of my conscious mind, I go, okay, this clearly isn't working. I am not a fit for this target audience, to use the language of a marketer. And so I don't know about you, Jarren. I'd love to hear how you transitioned from that experience to wanting like that image of success to what you have now. Because I know for me, one thing that I actually tell my clients is think more about, your values and your non-negotiables, but also how do you want to feel in that relationship?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I know that's security, safety, being respected, listened, and loved. And I
Yeah.
know what those feelings are because I've already got some amazing friends who do that for me already.
Yeah.
So technically at times I already feel like I'm in a relationship, if I'm completely honest. But I'd love to hear from you. Like what was that journey like for you to go from what you were experiencing to where you are now?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was a bit of a journey. Like it was a few years, honestly, for me, because I ended a long-term relationship that I knew was not right for me, and that was 4 years. So I knew that I just needed some time away to sort of figure this out. So I started the meditation during that time and sort of looking at that option. But I was like, I can't hide away myself, like hide myself in a cave like a monk.
No.
I still have needs. I still had sexual needs. I still wanted to get out there and date. But I was like, I need a different strategy here. Like this, what I've been doing isn't working. So I consciously started looking for men that were more emotional. Because I dated men who were very not emotional. They were not good with their emotions. And they would lie, because they'd rather cover up than actually admit that they couldn't talk about what was happening for them. So I started dating different guys, and I was like, I'm going to date people that I would not normally do. And I started to rely on my intuition about them as people, but I looked less at the package, the outside package. And this is when I started like confronting like, why am I only looking at white guys who are 6 foot tall, muscular or trim, and generally blonde and blue eyed? Like, why is that? What's going on here? So I started dating people that I didn't. And, I will admit, my friends were funny about it. I got lots
I
of
bet they
raised
were.
eyebrows, and they were like, who's this guy you brought around? And this is when I started seeing, this is sort of aside, but the femme shaming that was happening in our community. Because I dated some men,
Mm,
because I wanted more emotional men that could talk about their feelings. And some of them were more femme than others. But I realized at that time my own bias against femininity and men who would be more femme. I quickly realized that femme men are amazing, and they are not. This is generalization, but the ones I were
of
dating
course.
were able to at least talk emotionally or talk about their feelings. I'd rather them cry than suppress. So I went through this for a couple of years and met some really wonderful men who were my teachers. Honestly, they taught me how I could be different and what to expect in relationships was different. Because I sort of made a line in the sand for myself and said, I'm not willing to put up with that anymore, but I don't know what that looks like. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I
Mm.
know I don't want this. Like, I've had enough of this. But like, what is the next thing? Like, if I want a long-term partner, like, what does that look like? And so, like, what do I want? So, I'd go on these dates and then I'd be like, oh yeah, I really like that about that person, or I love the openness that they show, or I like that they cried at that commercial, And I sort of like my list started to change about what I wanted. Um, so, and I'd gone through a very long period. I think this is about a 3 year period where I was on my own and dating casually and met some lovely men along the way. And then I decided to take a trip, and I went on a trip on my own. And on that trip, I was like, you know what? I'm for once in my life really happy to be on my own and sort of enjoying these
Mm.
different relationships. Um, and then shortly thereafter, I met my now husband. And not to say that's going to happen because it kind of surprised me. And he's a very emotionally emotive, amazing man. Um, and that's what I wanted all along, was just this beautiful thing. So it was a
Yeah.
journey, and then, but you know what? It didn't stop there. Just because I met somebody, I still had to explore even further. Back to what we were talking about, being the perfect partner. Because now I had sort of nabbed the good guy. I had this amazing man who was incredible, but then the insecurities really started coming out. What if he finds out I'm a fraud? What if he finds out that I'm not as good as he thinks I am?
Yeah.
So it's one thing with dating, and then when we actually get into the relationship, it doesn't stop. So I would say, do your work while you're dating, because getting into a relationship isn't going to fix all of it.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I love that you said that too, because I could share my own stories on dating some of the emotional guys too. But what I would say is, I love everything you said. And I actually want to validate something too. Oh, that journey of you going away and being like, I'm so happy being single. And then bam, surprise, here's your husband.
Yeah.
That is, funnily enough, a very common story for a lot of peers that I've spoken to who are in very secure relationships.
Yeah.
And even though obviously there are some insecurities that have come out, I think that it really is a bit of a telltale when you can just go solo and just be like, oh man, I'm so happy and, peaceful. And you just sort of like,
Yeah.
I think your energy and dynamic changes because the need is taken out. You're not comparing yourself to the other people out there. You're just like, I'm so chilled out. I'm so happy with what I've got that I think you become more open
Mhm.
to people who are new. And I mean, to be honest, I think, I don't want to say COVID's a blessing in disguise for everyone in that context of taking time away, because I think it is a very lonely period.
Yeah.
I do think it is a very great period, as you mentioned, to work on these inner challenges that we face as a community. And I want to add that I think that from my experience too, because I have actually I actually, funnily enough, started dating guys who were not my usual type at all, just recently too. And it confronted me in different ways. And then I started getting the more emotionally available, being like, oh, this is nice. I actually like being chased for a change.
Right.
But then I also came across some other challenges that I had too. Like, for instance, I realized I actually still had my ex at the back of my head, and that was dictating the template of what I was looking for a bit.
Yeah.
I also realized that I didn't like guys who just constantly blew up my phone wanting to know how I was, because
Right.
it just got to the point. And like they weren't annoying, but it got to the point where it started to build a bit of resentment in me, and I'm like, I actually can't appreciate you anymore because I'm just too much. Just too much is
Too
going on right
much.
now.
Yeah, totally.
And, you know, it was lovely to feel wanted, but it got to the point where I actually grew tired of it very quickly, because I was like, I feel like there's such a self-esteem difference between us. And so, you know, it's interesting because I beat myself up recently wondering whether I'm being a perfectionist about the guys that I'm now choosing who are outside of my usual category. And at the same time, I keep reminding myself that, you know, they weren't good for me at the time for a good reason. You know, they couldn't meet my needs because even though they were lovely, much better progress than what I had before.
Yeah.
But Jarren, I think for me, what I realized is that I definitely require, you know, balance in my relationships. And if one is giving more than the other, which I've experienced on both ends, I just think that it's just a recipe for disaster. And I just think for me as well, specifically, like, I think I would like it ideally, and I say this obviously knowing in mind that this conversation is all about perfectionism, but I also realize that I think an element of security with that person, like they will have insecurities, we all do, but I would desire that they actually have the consciousness to work on them and actually want to grow, because I know that with like the last couple of guys, they either didn't listen when I said these are my boundaries, and that caused me to be like, enough. And more recently too, I just realized this is actually the real part of it. I wasn't able to live the full version of myself. And I thought, there's a problem when I'm the one cracking the jokes and I can't actually get any, and I'm not laughing in this experience. There's a problem when this person is so into me that they have lost appreciation, and what they are is admiring me. So they don't appreciate me. They just like the image that they've created in their head. So I really think in my journey, listening to you, I think it's wonderful, because I'm just like, I feel I'm in a very similar phase to who you were when you were in that 3-year period of just dating before the holiday. But I really do believe that dating is an optimization process. And we don't want to be in a process where our filter, that sort of lens that we have is glued to a laundry list of things that we need to have, which are just unreasonable. Especially that image of success, because I know that it really hurts us.
Yeah, no, totally. And, you know, it's funny, I talk to a lot of people and they're like, you know, when we talk about, I want a partner, and they're like, I want this, I want that, and I want that. And they'll list off easily 10 things, like, you know, right off the bat. But what I encourage them always is like, go away and write that list out. But then as a sub list, write why you want that. Like, because suddenly if someone's like, I want somebody with a hot body, and they're like, well, I don't really know I don't know if I want that. I guess so other people can see him as hot. And quickly we sort of have these things that we're striving for. And we ask ourselves, even just a few rotations, be like, why? You know, and as a practice, being like, why? Like, I'm going to come up with 10 things like why I need this or why I want this. And it really shows us very quickly what's important and what's not.
Yes, I agree. And I love that you've actually brought that exercise to my attention, because I'm going to use that with one of my clients this week, because that's the stage where he's at. And I think that it's so true, because then you go 5 layers deep and go, to use your example, oh, I need a partner with a good body. Why? Oh, because it'd be nice to show him off. Why? Oh, because, you know, it'll make me feel like I'm able to fit in. Why? Well, I don't feel like I really fit in with the gay community. Why? Oh, because there is such a standard of like needing to look good, and I just feel like this will solve all my problems.
That's right.
And then the question really becomes then, what's the reason that the perception of the community is so heavy on your shoulders? Like, what's the reason that this really matters to you. And it might boil down to the fact that I'm lonely and I don't feel like I can connect. In which
Right.
case, then it's a question of, okay, well, then I think that with all due respect, it's about finding your tribe and realizing that maybe the tribe that you're trying to fit in with isn't actually healthy for you.
No.
That it's not going to solve your, how you're feeling, because you're having to like bend over or, worse, try and draw in someone who will suddenly make you feel better about yourself. And I can tell you
That's
it won't.
right.
It's kind of like, to put it in a very different context, it's just like when entrepreneurs, they go from one milestone after the next and they think, oh, well, when I get the 10K months, then all my problems will be solved. I'm going to be
That's
fine.
right.
But unless you are fine right now,
Yeah.
that lack didn't just disappear. That sense of, money mindset, as we call it, that lack of that scarcity, that's still there.
Big time.
So I think that it's really powerful for people to take this opportunity to really think about what is the reason they really want the thing that they want, and is it ultimately serving them? As you've said, I love the fact that you use that expression, because I think many of us, we are afraid to ask that question out of being selfish.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of practice. Like if you can, because mindset is a huge important thing in coaching, and we talk to like clients because changing your perspective changes your whole view on it. One thing that I can say is like during that time is like I was going to practice. I was going to practice doing this differently, and if we view that as sort of like skill building, like I'm learning how to communicate better with each person. Okay, maybe that didn't work out. Maybe we only dated for a few months and that didn't work out. But the fact is that I tried and I made an effort. In perfectionist thinking, it's like, we're not going to get there, so why even try? It's kind of
Exactly.
all or nothing thinking. And this keeps you either trapped or it keeps you in the same cycles of unhealthy relationships.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. And it becomes quite self-sabotaging too, because one of the thought processes is, oh, well, I'll never find anyone. And so you kind of stop trying. You blow up your own chances because you're so put off by the impression of someone. You think, oh, it won't work.
Yeah.
I know that some clients I've worked with have eliminated people because they don't share the same interests. And I get it. Interests are very important.
Yeah.
But I think we can become so fixated on the end goal that we don't appreciate the person and how they can make us feel, because we're so disconnected with our own health and well-being too.
That's right.
But I appreciate the fact that we're rounding up to time now. So Jarren,
are we? Oh gosh,
time flew.
It does. There's always, Ken. There's always.
I know. So Jarren, firstly, thank you so much for jumping on this live with me. I absolutely loved it. I love talking with you as always. It's so good to have a fellow colleague who's helping our community out. Where can people find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, the best way is through my website, JarrenMacDougall.com is the easiest way. You can book a time. Generally, I'm willing to give anybody time if they just want to chat and see if this is a fit, or maybe not. There's no strings attached with when I talk to people. Sometimes just talking to someone can put them on a journey of change. And maybe I'm not that person, but I would love to be at least the catalyst, So JarrenMacDougall.com is the best way. Book a call for me. My calendar system comes up and I'm always willing to talk to many. I love hearing stories. I love hearing about gay men and their experiences. Not just because I am one. Well, yeah, maybe it is because I am one.
Bias.
But I encourage everybody to tell their story and find their voice wherever they are at. You've heard today me talk about where I've been at different parts of my life. And in 20 years, I'll have a different perspective again, probably, from where I am now. So let's talk. Let's get in touch and let's share our stories.